The winds in the north howled louder than ever, but they didn't bring the cold of death this time. They carried news. Whispers spread through every keep and every tavern, from White Harbor to Sunspear. Robb Stark, the young wolf, was alive. And he was winning. Walder Frey had been outmaneuvered. Catelyn Stark's suspicions had been right all along, and this time she acted before treachery could sink its fangs. The Red Wedding never happened. Instead, at the Twins, Robb's men seized the Freys during the feast. It wasn't clean, and it wasn't honorable, but it was war. They called it the Crimson Feast. Blood still spilled, just not Stark blood. From there, things moved fast. Riverrun stood firmly with the north. House Bolton was exposed early, thanks to a raven intercepted from Ramsay. That vile bastard never got the chance to sink his knives into Winterfell. The Karstarks grumbled about their dead lord, but their swords still stayed loyal when Robb rode home. Winterfell had been in ruins, but Robb stood on its broken walls again, just as the snow began to fall. Behind him stood his direwolf, grey. Wind eyes sharp like cold steel, and behind them both thousands of men, Northmen, Riverlanders, and even some Stormlanders. They didn't just chant his name, they believed it. He wasn't just king in the north anymore, he was becoming something more. Down south, the war had chewed through the realm like wildfire. Stannis Baratheon had lost at Blackwater. Renly was dead. The Lannisters still clutched King's Landing like a dying man gripping his chest. But they were weaker than they looked. Tywin was aging and Cersei was paranoid. Joffrey's cruelty had turned even the small folk against the crown. And then came the turning point. Tyrion Lannister, broken by his father's games and blamed. For the death of his nephew, offered Robb a deal. "If you want the throne," he said, seated across from Catelyn in a tent full of tension, "you'll need more than honor. You'll need strategy. You'll need someone who knows King's Landing, inside and out." Catelyn didn't trust him, Robb didn't like him, but they both understood war. Tyrion's price was steep. His freedom, a future seat on the council, and a full pardon. But he delivered. King's Landing fell not with fire, but with whispers, sabotage, and betrayal. Half of the gold cloaks turned when bribed. The rest were slaughtered when the gates opened in the dead of night to let in Robb's army. When dawn rose, Robb Stark entered the capital not as a conqueror, but as a solemn, grim survivor. The Iron Throne sat before him, jagged and twisted like the realm it ruled. He didn't smile when he took the crown. He barely spoke. He just knelt beside it for a long while, as if mourning all the lives lost for a chair. But in the end, he sat. And Westeros changed. His first decree was peace. Lords from every corner were summoned. Dorne didn't kneel, but they talked. The Reach sent Highgarden's bannermen, eager to preserve their wealth. The Vale, quiet and untouched through most of. The war offered neutrality first, and loyalty later, but it was never that easy. Not for a Stark. Cersei had vanished. Jaime was a prisoner in the north, silent and strange, his sword hand gone. Sansa Stark, rescued from King's Landing, barely spoke after her torment. Arya was still missing, presumed dead. Bran and Rickon were alive, thanks to the wildling. Osha, but their innocence had withered under the weight of burned castles and lost family. And Daenerys Targaryen, she was coming, with dragons. Robb knew peace was borrowed time, but he ruled anyway, wisely, fairly. He married a Frey girl, yes, but one he chose, not one forced upon him. She was kind. She made him smile again. Still, ghosts walked the halls. Of the Red Keep, the North whispered of abandoning the South. The South watched Robb like a wolf in sheep's clothing, and in the far, frozen lands beyond the Wall, a threat older than kings, queens, and dragons stirred. Robb Stark wore the crown of the Seven Kingdoms, but how long could he keep it? The Iron Throne might have been forged with fire and blood, but Robb Stark ruled with silence and stone. He didn't hold long speeches. He didn't seek applause. He stood tall, steady, the kind of king people feared disappointing more than they feared crossing. And for a while, that worked, but Westeros was a wounded beast, and even the best healer couldn't stop the bleeding right away. King's Landing wasn't used to northern rule. The courtiers sneered behind closed doors, whispering about the wolf in the dragon's den. Robb kept the small council tight, Catelyn beside him, ever watchful, Tyrion Lannister, ever sly, Davos Seaworth, brought from Dragonstone, was his honest voice in murky waters. Maester Luwin, though old and weary, had taken the chain again to guide his former ward. Even Brienne of Tarth had found a place at court, loyal as a shadow and twice as sharp. But there was one thing Robb hadn't yet learned. Victory didn't mean unity. The bannermen were restless. Lord Tarley of Horn Hill grumbled about northern customs. House Greyjoy, sensing opportunity, began raiding the western coast again. The Vale demanded favors, Dorne demanded independence, and then there was Sansa. She had returned to King's Landing under heavy guard. Her face was blank most days. When she looked at the Iron Throne, her eyes went hollow. She had seen too much, lived through too much. But the realm saw a beautiful, noble lady, a Stark and a Lannister's widow. That made her dangerous. Whispers began. Sansa should be queen beside her brother. The people love her. She knows the game. Robb only knows war. Robbie tried to reach her. He offered her a seat on his council, a voice in matters of the North, even sent her letters with memories of Winterfell. But Sansa stayed distant, polite, cold, proper. She had learned from Cersei, and she was playing the long game. Then came the Raven from the east. Daenerys Stormborn sails with fire and fury. 3 dragons, 10,000 unsullied, 1,000 ships. Robb read it twice. His hand trembled, not with fear, but with the weight of another war approaching too soon. The council met at once. Tyrion paled at the mention of Daenerys. Davos argued for negotiation. Catelyn wanted preparation, but Robb, as always, was quiet. She is Targaryen, he said finally. She thinks the throne is hers. And she has dragons, Tyrion added dryly. Even your direwolf can't bite fire. So ravens were sent, one to Dragonstone, a formal request for a meeting, one to the north, asking the lords to prepare for defense, and one to Jon Snow. Yes, Jon, still a bastard, still sworn to the Night's Watch. But rumors had trickled down, even to King's Landing. Jon had become Lord Commander, had seen the wildlings for what they truly were, had stood on top of the wall and looked into the eyes of the dead. Robb's letter was short. Brother, if you are still the boy I knew, then you'll tell me the truth. What's coming beyond the wall? The reply came weeks later. Only one sentence burned across the page. The dead are marching, and no crown will matter if we don't stop them. Robb folded the letter. His knuckles went white. He looked out the window of the Red Keep, across the poisoned streets and golden roofs, past the Blackwater Bay, toward the cold north he still called home, and he whispered, "We don't have time for more kings or queens." He didn't know. What scared him more? The dragons sailing toward him, or the death creeping from beyond the wall? But he knew one thing. The game was about to end, and winter was ready to begin. The meeting was set on neutral ground, Dragonstone. Robb didn't want to show weakness by asking Daenerys to come to King's Landing, and Daenerys wasn't foolish enough to march into the city her father died trying to hold. So they chose the ancient Targaryen seat, cold, rocky, and still stinking of salt and secrets. Robb sailed with a small retinue. Catelyn, Tyrion, Davos, and Brienne. Grey Wind came too, snarling at every wave as if the sea itself offended him. The people on the docks of Dragonstone stood frozen as the direwolf stepped off the ship, eyes flashing like storm clouds. Then came the dragons. They didn't descend in fury. They circled high above the castle, casting massive shadows. The sound of wings, leathery, ancient, powerful, made even seasoned men look up in terror. Grey Wind growled low. Tyrion stared skyward, a strange mixture of awe and dread in his eyes. "She has fire," Catelyn murmured. "We have to pray she doesn't want blood too." Inside, Daenerys waited in the great hall of Dragonstone. She stood tall, silver hair braided in warrior knots, her dress sharp like her words. Beside her were Missandei, silent and observant, and Ser Jorah as weathered as the stones they stood on. Grey Worm stood at the ready, his expression unreadable. Robb walked in like a storm given shape. Not flashy, not loud, but there was power. In his silence, Daenerys saw it instantly. This was no southern lord fattened by politics. This was a man who had bled, lost, and still stood taller than most. She spoke first. "You sit on my father's throne." Robb's reply was colder than the sea air. "Your father burned my grandfather alive." And just like that, the room tightened. A beat of silence stretched between them, history pressing down on both sides like a sword at each throat. But then Tyrion cleared his throat and stepped forward. "We've had enough fire. Maybe it's time we talk of ice." Daenerys stared at him. "You," she said softly, "you once served the family that murdered mine." "I served survival," Tyrion said, "as we all do, and survival is why we're here." Robb and Daenerys talked long into the night. No council, no guards, just the two of them in a candle-lit chamber that had once held dragons and kings. They didn't trust each other, not truly, but there was something underneath the suspicion. Understanding. Both had lost too much. Both had been crowned before they were ready. Both had been betrayed, loved, scarred. Daenerys spoke of slavery, of cities won and hearts lost. Robb spoke of the north, of wolves and fathers and brothers buried under snow. They were from different worlds, but the pain, that was the same. Then came the hard part. Robb asked, "Will you bend the knee?" Daenerys didn't flinch. "Will you?" The silence that followed wasn't tense. It was tired. "I don't want to rule you," Robb said finally. "But I will not be ruled. The North remembers. And I will not abandon what I've bled for," Daenerys replied. "Not again. The alliance should have failed, but it didn't. Because outside the walls of Dragonstone, a raven waited. A raven carrying Jon Snow's second letter. The wall has fallen. The Night King rides. I've seen him with my own eyes, and now he marches south." When Robb handed Daenerys the letter, her hands trembled for the first time. "It's not just my war," she said, voice cracking. "It's everyone's." So the two monarchs made a pact, not as king and queen, not as conqueror and rival, but as survivors. Together they would march north. Together they would stop the dead. And when the war was over, then they would decide what happens to the throne. But war doesn't wait for vows. Even as they rode toward Winterfell with armies at their backs and dragons in the skies, the Night King moved faster. And by the time they arrived in the north, the first dead had already crossed into the gift. Winterfell had never looked so alive and so afraid at the same time. The snows had come early, thick and unrelenting, but it wasn't just winter coating the stones in white. It was war. A different kind of war. The banners that flew now weren't just dire wolves. They were dragons too. Northern men watched in silence as unsullied soldiers marched in perfect formation across their courtyards, and Dothraki riders circled like restless spirits on horseback. The old lords grumbled. The small folk whispered, "She's Targaryen, the Mad King's daughter. They say she's a witch. She rides dragons. What does she want with the North?" But Robb's word held weight. His name still burned in their blood like old oaths, and they followed it, even if their eyes narrowed at Daenerys like she was a fire brought too close to their frozen world. Sansa met them at the gates. She stood tall now, dressed in the heavy furs of the north, her red hair braided like a queen, her eyes colder than ever. She didn't curtsy to Daenerys. She didn't even look her in the eye. "Winterfell is yours, your grace," she said flatly. "But the north is still ours." Daenerys didn't rise to it. She only nodded, the corner of her mouth tight. "I'm not here to rule the north. I'm here to save it." Sansa's answer was a ghost of a smile. "We've heard that before." Robb didn't miss it. The tension between the two women was sharp as Valyrian steel, and it would only grow worse. But war doesn't wait for grudges. That night in the Great Hall, 1,000 voices murmured. Old enemies sat side by side. Tyrion poured wine, like it might help anything. Davos stood quiet by the hearth, eyes watching everyone, especially the shadows. Jon Snow hadn't arrived yet, and the silence his absence left was almost louder than his presence would have been. And then the horns blew from the walls, not the sound of attack, the sound of return. Jon Snow rode in through the gates of Winterfell with Tormund Giantsbane, Gendry, Samwell Tarly, and a ragged force of survivors from the Watch and beyond. His face was tired, his eyes sunken. His black cloak was torn and stiff with ice, and he walked straight through the crowd to Robb. They stood there, brothers not by blood but by bond. For a second, no war, no crown, no wall stood between them. Robb pulled Jon into a hug, tight and real, and Jon whispered, "You shouldn't have come south." "And leave you alone to face death?" Robb asked. "You know me better." Then Jon turned to Daenerys. Their eyes locked again. Not like lovers, not yet, but like two people who had seen the same darkness and knew what it meant. Jon gave her a stiff nod. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I didn't come for thanks," she replied. He glanced at her dragons outside, perched atop the hills like waiting gods. "I can see that." The council met at once. Jon laid it all out. The wall was gone. The Night King had a dragon now, an undead beast with blue fire that melted stone. The army of the dead stretched farther than the eye could see. Villages north of the last hearth were already gone. No survivors, no screams. Just silence. Robb stared at the map. He could feel the cold creeping into his bones, not just the weather, the dread. "We'll make our stand at Winterfell," he said. "It's not strong enough," Tyrion argued. "It's all we have," Robb replied. "We hold here, or we fall everywhere." Preparations began instantly. The smiths forged dragonglass weapons. Gendry worked day and night. Sam shared everything he'd learned from the Citadel. Fire kills them, Valyrian steel, and dragonglass. Even Arya returned, as silent as a shadow, carrying blades and secrets and scars no one asked her about. As the days shortened, Robb and Jon stood atop the battlements often, watching the northern horizon. "They're coming," Jon said quietly. "I know," Robb answered. "What if we lose?" Robb didn't turn. "Then we die fighting, like wolves, like men of the north." And on the fourth morning, the sky darkened, not with clouds but with crows, fleeing south in flocks too large to count, and behind them, in the distance, a whisper of white. The dead had come. Snow fell not like flakes, but like ash. By the time the horns sounded from the watchtower, every able soul in Winterfell stood at their place. The walls, the trenches, the gates. The air was thick with the smell of sweat and fear, and even the bravest men gripped their weapons like lifelines. They weren't fighting for land or crowns anymore. They were fighting for breath. Robb Stark stood in full armor at the front lines, grey wind by his side, still as a stone. His direwolf growled low, sensing something none of them could see yet. Behind Robb, the northern army formed ranks, spearmen, archers, and the remnants of the Riverlands bannermen. To his right, Jon Snow waited with the Watch and the wildlings. Arya crouched silently on the rooftop, hidden and deadly. Sansa, against all arguments, remained within the crypts, but even there she held a blade. And above them all, circling with fire in their veins, flew Drogon and Rhaegal, Daenerys astride one, ready to meet the storm head-on. Then the first scream came. Not human, not animal, just wrong. The dead arrived not in lines, but in waves. Thousands upon thousands of them, blue-eyed, rotting fast, not mindless, not slow. They ran like wolves, climbed like spiders, fought like they remembered life. The first clash at the trench was a massacre, dragonglass spears impaled whites. By the dozen, but for every one that fell, 3 more swarmed through. The trench lit up with fire, thanks to Daenerys and her dragons, turning the frozen ground into burning mud. But even fire wasn't enough. The dead screamed, writhed, and still came. Robb fought like the warrior they once sang of, his sword a blur, grey wind tearing through limbs and skulls. Blood, black and red, coated the snow. Beside him, Jon cut through the dead with Longclaw, panting, slipping in the mud, but never stopping. He shouted commands. He saved 3 men in the space of a breath, and then lost 5 more in the blink of an eye. They were losing. The wall broke in the east. A group of whites, led by a reanimated giant, smashed through the defenses. It crushed men beneath its feet. Archers fled, and the Night King had not even shown himself yet. Drogon dove low, bathing. The eastern trench in fire, but the undead kept coming, crawling through flames like they didn't feel it. On the ground, Tormund roared, rallying the wildlings. Brienne held the gate with a broken shield and a bloodied blade. Theon Greyjoy, redeemed and unyielding, defended Bran in the Godswood, waiting. Inside the crypts, the air grew colder. Too cold. Sansa noticed it first. Then came the rumbling, and then the screams. The dead beneath Winterfell had been woken. The ancient Stark kings burst from their tombs like curses set free. Bones, shriveled flesh, snarling with the same blue eyes. Mothers and children screamed. Tyrion grabbed a sword he barely knew how to use. Missandei killed one with a spike through the eye. Sansa fought. For the first time, not with words, not with schemes, but with steel. Above, the sky changed. The Night King had arrived, riding Viserion, his undead dragon. He blasted the walls of Winterfell with blue flame. Stone crumbled. Soldiers flew like leaves in the wind. Daenerys turned her dragon toward him, fire meeting frost in the sky in a storm of death. It was a battle of gods. On the ground, Robb looked up just as a second blast of blue fire smashed through the battlements where his men stood. Dozens died in an instant, and then he saw Jon running, breathless. "The Godswood!" Jon shouted. "He's going for Bran!" Robb didn't ask. He just ran. Grey wind sprinted ahead, bounding over corpses and flames. Jon followed. Arya vanished into the shadows. They reached the Godswood just as the White Walkers stepped through the trees, silent, cold, deadly, surrounding Bran, who sat beneath the weirwood, still as ice, eyes rolled back in a warg's trance. The Night King walked slowly toward him, alone. Robb stood in his path, sword drawn, hands shaking, face covered in blood, soot, and snow. He didn't speak, he didn't taunt, he didn't beg. He just raised his sword. The Night King raised his hand, and behind Robb, the dead began to rise again, his own men, northern men, some with Stark banners still clutched in their fists. Robb turned, realizing the truth. They couldn't win this, not by fighting. Jon shouted his name. Arya was gone, and then silence, a breath of wind, and in the stillness of that moment, a dagger pierced the Night King's heart. Arya, from the shadows, a whisper of death. The Night King exploded in ice and ash, and just like that, every dead thing fell. The snow settled, the fires dimmed, and Robb Stark fell to his knees. The battle was over, but the war left scars no crown could hide. Winterfell stood, barely. The main gates were rubble. One of the towers had collapsed in a blue firestorm. Black scorch marks stretched across the courtyard where the dead had swarmed like insects. The snow was no longer white. It was red and brown and grey, the color of what was left behind when hope and horror collided. Robb Stark didn't sleep. For 2 days, he walked the grounds in silence, watching the dead being piled and burned. Northern soldiers, Dothraki riders, unsullied warriors, wildlings, and even some Lannister turncloaks, all stacked together in death, no banners separating them anymore. His armor was dented, his sword chipped, and his hands trembled when he wasn't thinking about them. But his face remained still. The victory had come, yes. But at what cost? The North had lost more than half its fighting men. The Unsullied were decimated. The Dothraki were nearly wiped out. Their once endless scream now, a memory drifting in the snow. Rhaegal, Daenerys' second dragon, had fallen during the battle, pierced by a dozen ice spears. He'd burned half the godswood before collapsing, screaming as he died. His body still steamed where he lay. Jon Snow, bruised and blooded, tried to talk to Robb that night. "We survived," Jon said softly. "That's something." Robb looked at the fire. "Surviving and winning aren't the same." Jon didn't argue. He just stood there, watching the flames devour another pyre of brothers. "You fought like father would have," Robb added after a pause. Jon swallowed the lump in his throat. "You led like him." But Robb turned away. "No. He died with honor. I survived with compromise. Daenerys was worse. She didn't weep. She didn't speak. She just stood in the ruins of the godswood where Rhaegal had died, staring at the trees, her jaw clenched, her knuckles white. Missandei tried to speak to her. So did Tyrion. Even Arya approached her once, cold and calm, offering thanks. But Daenerys had lost too much. 2 dragons, half her army. And now, she looked at the North like it was a frostbitten battlefield she had no place in. The people didn't cheer for her. They didn't thank her. They nodded in respect, but they whispered when she passed. And Sansa? Sansa saw it all. "You can't hold the North," she told Robb in private. "Not with her at your side." She helped save it. "And they'll remember that for a week," she said. "But after that, they'll remember she's a Targaryen." Robb didn't want to believe it, but he felt it too, in the way the lords spoke to him more freely than they did to Daenerys, in the way men chanted, "The king in the North again," even though he wore the crown of all 7 kingdoms now. Then came the council at Winterfell. All surviving lords and commanders gathered to decide what came next. Tyrion, pale and cautious, broke the silence. "The North still breathes. The dead are gone. Now comes the matter of the throne." Daenerys straightened in her seat. "There's no matter. The throne is mine by right. I came to defeat the dead. And I did." Robbie leaned forward. "You didn't do it alone." "No," she admitted, "but I've fought for this, lost for this. My people followed me across the world for this. I will not be pushed aside because Northerners feel pride." Sansa's voice cut through the room. "It's not pride. It's survival. The North remembers what Southern kings bring. Taxes, war, fire. We bent the knee once. We won't do it again." Tyrion raised a hand. "Peace must mean compromise." Robb looked at Jon. His brother hadn't spoken since the council began. "Say something," Robb said. Jon met his eyes, and for once he looked tired of duty. "I don't want the throne," Jon muttered. "Not then, not now. But someone has to take it," Daenerys said coldly, "before the realm breaks again." And that's when Davos, quiet, weathered Davos, finally spoke. "Maybe it's not about who wants it. Maybe it's about who the realm will follow." A heavy silence followed. Everyone was looking at Robb. He didn't smile, he didn't nod. He didn't want it, But they all knew the truth. The people saw him as king already. He had defended the north, bled with the Riverlands, spared the south, and fought death itself. And Daenerys, for all her fire, had begun to feel like a flame, flickering too hot, too wild, too far from home. They told Daenerys in the war room. Not in front of the lords, not in front of Robb, not in the Godswood or at the feast. They told her in a quiet, firelit room where stone walls couldn't hide. The weight of what they were about to say. Jon Snow was Aegon Targaryen. Sam told her first, gently, nervously, his voice shaking. Then Bran confirmed it, his eyes distant, cold, like he was watching the past as he spoke. Your father, Rhaegar, married Lyanna Stark in secret, Bran said flatly. Jon is their son. He is not a bastard. He is the true-born heir to the Iron Throne. And for the first time since the war began, Daenerys looked afraid, not of the Night King, not of death, but of losing everything she had bled for. Why are you only telling me now? She asked, her voice trembling. Because you deserve the truth, Sam replied. No, she said, standing slowly. I deserve the throne. Bran blinked once. He has the better claim. Daenerys turned away, her fists clenched. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She whispered, so even after all this, it's still a man's world. Jon didn't want it. He made that clear the moment Robb confronted him. You think I want a crown? Jon growled. I never asked to be anyone's heir. I never asked to be born. But you were, Robb said quietly. And now it's out. Whether you want it or not, it'll spread. It doesn't matter, Jon snapped. I'll swear to you now in front of the gods. I won't take it. Robb nodded, but his eyes said something else. It did matter, because the realm wouldn't forget, and neither would Daenerys. Tyrion came to Robb next. They stood on the ramparts of Winterfell, watching snow swirl in the morning light. Tyrion's face was pale, sickly. He'd barely touched wine in days. She's not the same, he said quietly. Who? Daenerys. She came here with fire, with mercy once. Now all I see is steel behind her eyes. Robb didn't respond. Tyrion turned to him. She sees you as a threat now. You realize that? She's not wrong. You can't have two rulers, Tyrion added. Eventually one has to kneel. Robb looked out across the north, where rebuilding had already begun, where smoke still rose from funeral pyres, where children huddled in silence, not playing, just staring into the snow like it would swallow them again. He exhaled. I won't kneel, he said softly. Not anymore. Daenerys tried to hold on to peace at first. She met with Robb in the Godswood, where the snow muffled their words, and only the red leaves above seemed to listen. I didn't come here to fight you, she said. We shared blood in that battle. We lost together. We won together. But the throne is mine. It always has been. And the North, Robb asked, do we just become a footnote in your story? You can have your home, your customs, even your independence, if you swear. Fealty. That's not independence, her voice cracked. I crossed the world for this. Robb's eyes narrowed. You crossed the world because you believed in something, but now you're chasing a chair. Her breath steamed in the cold air. She stepped closer. Do you think they'll love you forever, Robb? The North turns on their kings fast. One mistake, one whisper, they'll gut you the same as they did the Mad King. I'm not my father. Neither was mine, she said bitterly, and she walked away. That night Sansa gathered the Northern Lords. She laid it out plain and sharp. Robb Stark is our king. He bled for the realm. He saved it. The South has had its chance. Look what it brought us. Mad kings, incest, fire and death. No more. No, they agreed. Every house, every banner. And when Dawn sent a raven a week later, it didn't bend the knee to Daenerys. It acknowledged Robb as protector of the realm. The Reach followed. The Vale, always cautious, stayed silent. But silence was better than rebellion. Daenerys stood in the hall that night as ravens arrived one by one, naming Robb as the true king. Not just of the north, but of the 7 kingdoms, or what was left of them. She stood before the hearth in Winterfell, shaking with fury, staring into the flames like she wanted them to swallow the world whole. Missandei touched her arm. He could still leave, she whispered. Sail east. Start over. But Daenerys had crossed too much fire to retreat now. She turned to Grey Worm and said only one thing. Prepare the dragons. Prepare the dragons. The air over Winterfell was colder than ever, not from winter's bite, but from what hung heavy and unsaid. Everyone knew something was coming. Not the dead this time. Fire. Daenerys didn't wait. At dawn, before the bells rang, before the gates opened, she mounted Drogon, dressed in black, her silver hair blowing behind her like a banner of war. No speeches, no counsels, no more patience. She had lost Rhaegal, she had lost the South, and now the North, the realm, her legacy, was slipping from her hands like grains of sand. So she chose fire. Winterfell didn't see it coming. The first blast hit the eastern tower. Stone shattered like brittle bone, sending shards raining down on sleeping soldiers. The next burned through the stables. Horses screamed, men scattered. The sky turned red as Drogon roared overhead, circling like a vengeful god. Robb woke to the sound of thunder and flame. He bolted upright, blade already drawn, heart pounding, like war drums. Outside, the world was burning. She's doing it, Jon gasped, storming into the room, his face ashen. She's burning the north. Robb didn't speak. He didn't rage. He just pulled on his armor, fast, practiced. Then he turned to Jon. We end this now. They ran through smoke and snow, through shattered halls and burning banners. Sansa was already in the crypts, leading the women and children down below. Arya was gone, vanished into the chaos. But Grey Wind was at Robb's heels, howling. Through the flame, eyes locked on the sky. Then the dragon came again, a shadow blotting out the rising sun. Soldiers screamed, archers fired, arrows snapping harmlessly off Drogon's scales. Jon looked up. She won't stop. No, Robbie said grimly. She won't! So he did what no northern king had done in centuries. He went to face a dragon. In the courtyard, Daenerys landed, Drogon snarling behind her, smoke rising from his jaws. She dismounted like a queen, come to collect the debt of defiance. Grey Worm approached from the flames, blood on his blade. The inner walls are holding. Break them, she said coldly. Let them see what loyalty costs. That's when Robb walked out of the fire, alone, armor blackened, sword sheathed, face smeared with ash. Daenerys turned, shocked. You should be dead. I will be, Robb said calmly. But not before I ask you one last time. Stop. Her lips twisted, furious. Stop. I begged for peace. You gave me silence. I bled beside you. You let your sister poison the realm against me. They feared your fire, he said softly. Now they were right too. I am the dragon. She hissed, and they will kneel. Robb looked past her, at Drogon, at the flames, at the blood soaking his land. And he realized in that moment what his father must have felt, standing before a mad king with honor and hope, and nothing to show for it but death. I won't kneel, he said. And then came the dagger. Not from Daenerys, not from Grey Worm, from Jon. It slid clean between her ribs, quiet as snow. Her eyes widened, not in pain, but in betrayal. She turned to him. You? I'm sorry, Jon whispered, but you'd burn it all. She collapsed into his arms, her breath fogging in the cold. Drogon roared, a cry so loud the ground trembled. He lunged forward, ready to incinerate them both. But then he stopped. His eyes met Jon's, then Robb's, then Daenerys's lifeless body. He didn't burn them. He burned the throne. There, in the ruins of Winterfell's great hall, Drogon melted the iron crown Robb had once sworn to protect, until all that remained was molten steel and broken dreams. Then he took Daenerys's body and flew away, vanishing into the snowstorm. After the fires died, after the ashes settled, the realm stood broken again. Jon was gone. He vanished into the north, beyond the wall, seeking something he never said aloud. Sansa ruled the north as its queen, firm, fair, and unyielding, and Robb Stark, crowned no longer, remained in Winterfell, not as king, but as guardian. He rebuilt not thrones, but homes. He passed no grand decrees. He ruled by presence, not power, because in the end, Robb had learned what the others hadn't. Victory wasn't winning the game, it was refusing to play it. Years passed, the snows melted, and returned again, as they always did. The realm, scarred and tired, healed not with steel, but with silence, the kind that follows too much death. Robb Stark never called himself king again. He stayed in Winterfell, not out of pride, but because he couldn't leave. Too many ghosts walked its halls. His father, his mother, the brothers he lost, the wars that never truly ended. He walked with grey wind through the woods every morning, and each step reminded him of what he'd saved, and what it had cost. The people didn't call him Your Grace anymore. They called him Warden of the Realms. Not North, not South, just the realms. A man who had touched every corner of the kingdom and returned with ash in his lungs and peace. In his silence, he ruled with Sansa, though she took the crown in the north. Together they formed a new pact, not written in conquest, but in understanding. The north would remain free, the south would follow its own lords. No more single thrones, no more kings and queens to burn the world for power. And when the people looked at Robb, they didn't see a ruler. They saw the man who stood against fire and didn't burn. Sansa Stark, queen in the north, ruled from Winterfell's great hall, rebuilt, though smaller now, more modest. She wore no jewels. Her voice never needed to rise, and no one dared test her patience. She remembered everything: the Red Keep, the lies, the whispers, the quiet terror of being pretty and powerless. She would never be either. Again, under her rule, the north flourished. Crops returned, walls were rebuilt. The Northmen finally stopped preparing for winter, because it had already come. And being survived, Arya Stark sailed west. No letters came, but sometimes ravens landed on the windowsills of Winterfell with strange feathers tied to their legs. Blue and silver and gold, foreign, wild. Sansa always smiled when she saw them. She's still breathing, she would say, and likely killing. And Jon Snow, no one knew for sure. Some said he built a cabin deep beyond the wall, where the trees whispered and the wind spoke only in riddles. Some said he became part of the wildling tribes, a ghost story children heard in the frost. Others claimed he had vanished into the woods with Ghost, seen only once each year when the stars aligned just right. A man with white fur by his side, walking toward the edge of the world. Robb never tried to find him. He figured Jon would come when it mattered. He always did. The Iron Throne was never rebuilt. The melted steel was left in the crypts of Winterfell, a reminder that the crown had nearly destroyed them all, and now no one wanted it. There were councils, yes. Lords and ladies met, they voted, they argued, but no one ruled from above, because when Robb Stark had walked away from the throne, the realm had finally understood power wasn't the problem, the hunger for it was, and for once, Westeros remembered. Peace, not from fear, not from fire, but because the wolves remained.